You've probably heard about all the commotion regarding the Modretro Chromatic, and may have been intrigued, and immediately scared away by the $200 price point. If that's you, then you've been scouring YouTube and Reddit, watching every review and reading each post, trying desperately to convince yourself that this is a good investment. But no need to fret, because here at the CCP, we have not one but two chromatics, and boy do we have a lot to say. Part 1. One lucky dude. First off, who in their right mind would even spend so much money to make this Panzer tank Game Boy Color hybrid? Palmer Freeman Luckey, that's who. Palmer Luckey was born on September 19th, 1992 at the age of 0. He had 3 little sisters, and his mom homeschooled him. His dad, meanwhile, was a car salesman. From an early age, Palmer loved to tinker with things, and he soon found it was more fun to mess with things that already existed instead of trying to invent some new idea. This form of inventing is called modding, and he got pretty good at it. At the age of 15, he was sure the future of video games was in VR, so he started messing around with that idea. At around that same time, he and some friends started the Modretro forums, a place where people could discuss and share their ideas for modding old video game consoles into portable versions, among other things. Also, while all this was happening, he was buying broken smartphones, fixing them, and then flipping them all for a huge profit to fund his VR experiments. At the age 16, all his phone fixing and mad scientisting in his parents' garage had finally paid off. He had completed his first VR headset, called the Oculus Rift, and with it, created the company Oculus. 6 years later, when he was 22, he sold Oculus to Facebook for $2 billion. Then 3 years later, in 2017, he founded Anduril Industries, an autonomous defense contractor, meaning he makes killer drones for the government. Yeah, he's an interesting dude, and this has just barely scratched the surface of Luckey Palmer's crazy life. And then on June 3rd, 2024, fueled by all that sweet, sweet Game Boy nostalgia, Modretro announced their first product, the Modretro Chromatic. Part 2. What does it do? The Chromatic is a Game Boy Color replica, meaning it plays Game Boy Color games through the means of an FPGA board. An FPGA board is basically a reprogrammable circuit board. It uses code to mimic the different chips inside each console, and its software can be rewritten, meaning its code can shapeshift from console to console, like the Analogue Pocket. Unlike an Analogue Pocket, the Chromatic is built specifically for a Game Boy Color. Luckily, the Game Boy Color can also play Game Boy games, so your 30-year-old copy of DuckTales will work just fine. That is, maybe not. But you get the idea. The Chromatic can play original cartridges. That's cool, but the Chromatic's real selling point is its perfect emulation. But is this true, and what does that even mean? Well, one thing that helps their claim is the resolution. The Chromatic uses a 160 by 144 pixel screen, which is accurate to the original, meaning the screen actually has pixels, unlike the Analogue Pocket, which is basically an HD screen emulating pixels, which is why it's a little off. Also, the overall design of the cell is the same, having 3 sharp corners and 1 round one on the bottom right. It also has that butt thing that's very reminiscent of the Game Boy Color. Thankfully, they didn't keep the old speaker, and instead replaced it with a very nice mono speaker, which is also true to the original Game Boy. Another thing is the screen brightness. You can now see the screen perfect in broad daylight, and the screen is also made of sapphire, meaning it's almost fully scratch-proof. Just like the original Game Boy Color, it comes with color palettes you can access by holding the D-pad and buttons on the boot-up screen, which by the way was removed for copyright reasons. The Chromatic comes with 14 color schemes in total, 12 of them being from the OG Game Boy Color, and 2 of them being new. The new ones are the DMG1 and DMG2. The first of which is meant to mimic the original Game Boy with its classic 4 shades of vomit green, while the second is meant to look like playing a Game Boy game on a Game Boy Color with no palette. The combinations for them are right plus A plus B for DMG1, and left plus A plus B for DMG2. Part 3. The Screen. The screen. Wow. It's good. I briefly mentioned the screen earlier, talking about how it's scratch-proof and easy to see in the sun. That was an understatement. This screen is crazy. I mean, I could play this thing turned at 70 degrees in 70 degrees weather, and it would still be fine. You could actually walk around playing your DuckTales in broad daylight. Also, in case you accidentally run it over with your Honda Civic, it's run over proof too. Feel free to try, but first sign here. The whole body is made of metal all the way down to the battery cover, which by the way takes 3 AA batteries, which is in the middle of the Game Boy's 4 batteries and the Game Boy Color's 2 batteries. They claim it can last 24 hours, but I'm a little skeptical. In my experience, the battery differs greatly from game to game and battery to battery. Games like Wario Blast last pretty long, but things like Dragonim, one of the launch games, seem to drain the battery a lot faster.
Part 4. Issues.
Okay, enough praise. It's time to prove why the Chromatic actually sucks. Or not. We'll have to go over everything first. Horrible issue number 1. Cash money! The Chromatic goes for $200. That's a lot. Well, is it justified? Let's take a look at what you get when you order a Chromatic. First, you get this sweet magnetic case made of a surprisingly strong material. Then, of course, you get the Chromatic itself, which, to be honest, feels like it's $200. In a good way. Then, surprisingly, you get some Modretro branded batteries. I've heard some reports of them coming dead, but mine seem to work great, so no complaints there. You also get a Modretro version of Tetris. This is a pretty sweet port of Tetris, and it's obviously made with competitions in mind, because Luckey Palmer is kind of a nerd. And that's it. Now, just out of curiosity, let's take a look at some of the launch titles. Number 1, Toki Tori Ultimate Edition is a simple puzzle game that slowly adds complexity to its levels in the form of these little powers you get. You play as a little bird who's going on a quest to save all of its little unhatched, kidnapped siblings, and boy does he have a lot of siblings. Fun fact, Toki Tori is actually a much older game that they remade for the Chromatic in the form of this deluxe version. It currently goes for 45 monies. Also, every Chromatic launch title comes with a little metal charm that I think you're supposed to put in the hole in your Chromatic, but it just kinda gets in the way, so I don't do that. 2 thumbs up. Number 2, Patchy Matchy. Patchy Matchy is a very simple game, where you have to line up 4 sea creatures to pop them, while at the same time more creatures fall down. If they reach the top, you lose. The game has some hidden achievements, and when you get them all, you win. It's a fun game, but it's also really basic stuff. What more could I say? Well, I could say that the one programmer and artist was the lead animator of Paw Patrol. Mind blown. As of writing this script, it goes for 30 pieces of money. Again, this game also comes with a cool charm. 1 thumbs up. Number 3, Dragonim. Dragonim is not like the other 2 games. It's a full-sized RPG with battle mechanics, 9 dungeons, and tons of characters. And just like the other 2 games, Dragonim can be played on original hardware. Dragonim is great. The puzzles are simple but fun, the combat is really interesting, and the story is tight. You play as a young warrior named Chris, but you're no ordinary warrior. Your dad Curtis is the greatest dragon slayer in the land, and vanquished, sealed away, and pretty much just humiliated countless dragons. But suddenly, he disappeared, so you embark on an epic quest to find him, and on the way slay some dragons of your own, stop evil cults, learn spells, and all those sort of awesome things. Along the way, there'll be plenty of zombies and demons walking around that you'll have to avoid, because if their attack hits you, it takes you into a classic turn-based RPG, complete with spells, medieval weapons, and tons of items. This might be one of the best, or the best Chromatic launch title. It just feels so well made, and it's only 4,500 cents, or $45 in layman terms. 4 thumbs up. And is this a good time to tell you that all the Chromatic games come with a full color instruction manual? Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I can't really say much for the other games other than they look cool, because I only have these 3, so they're the ones I can really talk about. I will say though, the quality of the games I got is surprising, and I'm sure the others are great.
Horrible issue number 2.
The design. I don't get it. Why does everyone say this thing is ugly? Those stripes in the bottom are cool. But really, when you're sitting on your computer for 5 hours trying to nitpick this thing, you might convince yourself that the colors suck, or they shouldn't have put first edition on it. But when you're actually playing this thing, you don't notice any of that at all, so it's really not a problem. They obviously were trying to stay close to the original design when they included details like the link cable port, headphone jack, and all the other stuff that looks like a Game Boy Color.
Horrible issue number 3. Just buy an analog.
Just buy an analog.
It seems like everyone who hates the Chromatic has an Analogue Pocket. The Analogue Pocket is an FPGA replica system like the Chromatic, but unlike the Chromatic, its selling point isn't build quality or nostalgia, it's doing everything. At first glance, that seems like a good thing. I mean, its screen is 10 times higher resolution than the Game Boy. Its screen is also bigger. It can play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, also make music. Game Boy Advance. Oh, and the screen you can also buy adapters to play different handhelds like Game Gear, TurboGrafx, PC Engine, and the Atari hook up to a TV with a dock that you can replicate all those handheld. And it's only around $40 more expensive with shipping. So why would anyone ever get a Chromatic? Well, the Chromatic is something the Analogue Pocket will never have. Simplicity. The Chromatic just feels like a Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Nothing more, nothing less. I could see why some people would want all those features, but to be honest, the whole point of a nostalgic handheld is its simplicity, something the Analogue obviously lacks. Every little detail on this thing feels simple, in the best kind of way. If you already have an Analogue, then this would be redundant, but if you don't, then I think this concept of simplicity is its biggest selling point, and the reason I think the Chromatic is worth it.